Welcome to our Alumni Nutrition Talks series, a celebration of 40 years of training nutritional therapists. I'm Heather Rosa, the Dean, and I hope you enjoy this presentation.
Well, hello there, and thank you for joining this health talk from the Institute for Optimum Nutrition. My name is Mike Murphy. I'm a nutritional therapist and health educator. I'm an ION graduate, and it's a real pleasure today to be talking to you about men's health, which is particularly fitting given that November is Men's Health Month, which sounds a bit strange because men's health matters in the other months too, but at least it's shining a light on this topic of men's health, which I think is quite important because the fact is men are struggling these days. Men have higher obesity rates, a higher prevalence of hypertension, a higher rate of heart attacks. They develop cardiovascular disease 10 to 15 years earlier than women. They have a 30% higher overall cancer death rate. In the UK, men account for 75% of suicides. In fact, between the ages of 20 and 49, it's the number one cause of death. Men are also less likely to schedule regular doctor visits, which can lead to kind of delays in detecting and treating more serious health issues. So I guess it's no wonder that women tend to outlive men by about 5 years in the UK, that is. In fact, I heard a shocking statistic that 19% of men, call it 1 in 5, will die before the age of 65. Right? So you have to ask yourself the question, is there something about the male physiology that predisposes us to an earlier grave? Because when you look at the human body and the dozen or so systems that kind of keep us functioning, they're mostly the same between men and women. You know, we share the same lungs, the circulatory system, the nervous system, the immune system, the same gut. Apart from just a few organs that I could literally count on one hand, most of the internals of men and women are the same. But I guess you could say the physiological difference between men and women essentially comes down to the endocrine system, which is to say our hormonal system. You know, we make about 100 hormones in the body. Hormones are molecules that orchestrate chemical processes throughout the body. And there are a class of hormones that are called androgens. There are about half a dozen with big, long, ugly names that are difficult to pronounce. They're made by both men and women, but men just make a lot more androgens than women. But the main androgen that everybody knows is testosterone. It is definitely the star of the show when it comes to men's health. And so I want to take a little bit of time and explain testosterone and what it does. It's responsible for essentially bringing on puberty, facial hair, the deepening of voice, libido, sperm production, as well as things like muscle growth and bone density and even energy production. The vast majority of a man's testosterone is produced in the testes, and testosterone essentially circulates around the body and it affects various tissues and cells. Of course, the reproductive organs are affected and respond to testosterone, but it also affects other non-reproductive tissues around the body, like muscle, like bone, hair follicles, our brain, our liver, even our fat cells react to testosterone. And so the testosterone that is produced circulates in the bloodstream, but I have to say it's mostly bound up to what we call carrier proteins. The body has a way of safely transporting substances that otherwise have very powerful effects to make them kind of less available, because too much testosterone can be problematic. And so it's actually only about 2% of the circulating testosterone that is unbound. And that's what we call free testosterone. And it's this testosterone that is readily available to enter cells and affect tissues in the body. and do what testosterone is supposed to do. So with that, I want to talk about just 3 conditions that really kind of only affect men for the most part. We're talking about testosterone deficiency. I want to talk about erectile dysfunction. And I want to talk about a condition called benign prostatic hyperplasia, otherwise known as enlarged prostate, that mostly affects kind of older men. And what I would like to discuss, I'm going to first discuss the signs and symptoms of these conditions, as well as the kind of risk factors and the main causes before I get into solutions, because the natural strategies for preventing and reversing these 3 conditions kind of work across the board. All right. So we'll look at solutions towards the back part of this presentation. Okay. Starting with low testosterone. Let's get into this. This essentially, as it says on the tin, so to speak, it's when our testosterone levels fall below what is considered normal, right? Today, around 40% of men over the age of 40 have low testosterone. The medical term is called hypogonadism. Hypo meaning low. And so just like hypothyroidism is a thyroid that doesn't quite make enough thyroid hormone, hypogonadism are gonads that don't quite make enough gonad hormone. And unfortunately, testosterone levels have been in decline in the male population over the last 50 years or so. In fact, it might surprise you to know that on average, men today have only 1/3 the testosterone that their grandfathers had. And, we'll discuss some of the contributors to this, but it's really quite an alarming statistic when you consider the role of testosterone in reproduction, right? So what are some of the signs and symptoms of low testosterone? Well, if you have low testosterone, you might notice that you've put on some weight, particularly around the belly. You might feel that your energy isn't quite what it used to be. You might have noticed a drop in your libido or your erectile function. Of course, testosterone is needed for sperm production. So infertility can be a factor. You might find it's harder to put on muscle, or you've lost a little bit of strength. And mood can be an issue as well. Either a low mood or increasing irritability. Clearly, any one of those signs on their own doesn't necessarily point to low testosterone. But if you have, several of those symptoms, low testosterone is something that you might want to consider. And so in terms of some of the causes and risk factors, I guess the big one is aging. After the age of 40, our testosterone declines by about 1% per year. We haven't figured out how to stop aging, but certainly diet and lifestyle choices can work for us or against us on that one. Chronic stress is a natural survival response to danger, and that fight or flight response is driven by hormones, principally cortisol, which, like testosterone, is what we call a steroid hormone. And the body can only make so much steroid hormones. And since stress hormones are kind of about immediate survival, the body will always prioritize them over longer term investments, like, say, reproduction. So if you're stressed out much of the time, your testosterone production is going to take a back seat to your cortisol production. Sleep is an issue. We make testosterone when we sleep. And so if our sleep is suffering, that can be a cause of low testosterone. Obesity and alcohol are somewhat kind of related in how they impact testosterone. Without getting too technical, our fat cells can produce an enzyme that actually converts testosterone into estrogen. It's called aromatase. And the more body fat we have, the more aromatase we make, and the more testosterone we can convert into estrogen. And as it happens, excessive alcohol also increases aromatase levels. Now, the mineral zinc is probably the most important mineral when it comes to sexual health in men, we need zinc, as I mentioned, to make sperm. We also need it to make testosterone. So logically, deficiency in that mineral will lead to a decline in our testosterone levels. And there are a number of medications that are commonly prescribed that also impact testosterone levels. I'll name just a couple. Metformin is prescribed for type 2 diabetics to help regulate blood sugar, and that can reduce testosterone. And also a class of drugs known as statins, which are prescribed to reduce cholesterol, can also impact testosterone. And that is because we actually make testosterone out of cholesterol. So anything that lowers cholesterol can impact testosterone as well. Let's talk about erectile dysfunction, another condition that only affects men. Fairly common, I have to say. It affects 1 in 5 men in the UK. It's also called ED, or impotence is what it used to be referred to. But the definition of ED is a consistent inability to maintain or sustain an erection sufficient for satisfactory intercourse. It's by no means a lethal condition, but we can't underestimate the impact that ED can have on a man's mood, his relationships, his quality of life. Most men experience it at least occasionally. It can be psychological in nature. That's the minority of cases. Relationship issues can be a factor, stress, anxiety. There are literally millions of potential stressors, and any one of them can affect the erectile response. But the most significant, perhaps, psychological cause is what we call performance anxiety. It only has to happen to a man once, and it can be humiliating. And at the next opportunity for sex, all it takes is a triggering thought or a worry that it might happen again, and it can kind of create a vicious cycle. Some of the other causes, right? Low testosterone. Testosterone influences the production of a substance called nitric oxide, which helps to relax blood vessels in the penis and around the body, and that allows for increased blood flow. As I just alluded, stress and anxiety are perhaps the biggest killers of erectile function, because the physiology of the erection actually requires that the parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest side of the nervous system, is activated. So what do I mean by the parasympathetic nervous system? There are two sides to the nervous system. There's the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight, and there's the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest. And in our ancient kind of evolutionary past, we lived in the parasympathetic nervous system most of the time. That fight or flight response was supposed to be used very sparingly. It's a very expensive bodily process, and it takes a lot out of us. So it was intended to keep us alive in the face of imminent danger. And so it's kind of logical that fight or flight response is no place for an erection, right? Nature kind of takes care of that. If you were running from the proverbial saber-toothed tiger and you were to stop for a quickie, you would most likely be taken out of the gene pool, right? And other causes of erectile dysfunction. Cardiovascular disease is a potential cause. And that's because, as I mentioned, the penis is filled with tiny blood vessels called capillaries. And when arteries get constricted with atherosclerotic plaque, that can happen with cardiovascular disease, that can restrict blood flow to certain parts of the body, including the penis. And so it's actually thought that ED can be a 2 to 5 year advanced warning for potentially a more serious cardiovascular event. So just taking Viagra is kind of a plaster that, might be kind of ignoring a more serious underlying issue to consider. So, if it's a frequent occurrence and it's not stress related, that's something to consider. Diabetes as well. The increased levels of blood sugar can damage blood vessels and cause plaque to build up. There can be neurological factors to consider as well. If a disc in the spine, in the lower spine, I should say, is kind of impinged or impinging a nerve that feeds into the groin or the testes, this is when perhaps chiropractic care might be helpful. I guess I should also add that even things like riding a bike, for more than 3 hours a week, that also can increase the rate of ED. And again, there are certain medications that can play a role in terms of side effects, namely SSRIs or antidepressants and beta blockers that are prescribed for heart conditions. One of the side effects is erectile dysfunction. And of course, a poor diet, right? The Western diet with its high sugar intake, processed food and toxic vegetable oils, along with kind of a lack of colorful fruits and vegetables that are rich in antioxidants. This dietary pattern over time can drive inflammation in the body. And that underpins so many chronic diseases today, including diseases of the reproductive system, right? Thirdly, the condition benign prostatic hyperplasia, or an enlarged prostate. It's a condition that I have to say really only affects men over the age of 50. And at that age, we're talking about almost half of all men. And for men that make it to 90, it's roughly 90% of men that are 90 have an enlarged prostate. So we can almost kind of consider this just a fact of growing older as a man. What is a prostate? What is the prostate gland? It's a kind of a walnut size organ that's situated just below the bladder, and it surrounds the urethra, which is the tube that carries urine and semen out of the body. It's primarily responsible for producing prostatic fluid, which is rich in enzymes and proteins and minerals that nourish sperm and increase their chances of actually reaching the fallopian tubes and hopefully fertilizing an egg. That's the idea anyway. But because of the proximity of the prostate to the bladder, when the prostate is enlarged, it can put pressure on the urethra and the bladder, and it can block the flow of urine, okay? And so signs and symptoms of an enlarged prostate typically relate to urination, an urgency to go, a hesitancy to get started. There's a condition called nocturia, which is kind of the medical term for just having to wake up several times in the night to wee. And if you're a man over 50, you might know what that's like. We also see a slowing down of the urinary flow rate. And, that can look like, if you go to a public toilet, you're the first guy to the trough and the last one to finish, right? And so what's the problem with an enlarged prostate? An enlarged prostate is not cancerous necessarily, but it does increase one's chances of prostate cancer. And that's why it's a good idea to start monitoring the size of your prostate at 50, right? But, I should say that, although 40 to 50% of men over 50 develop benign prostatic hyperplasia, only 1 in 8 go on to develop prostate cancer. So just to put that in perspective, testing is fairly routine, and it's assessed by a blood test that your GP can order. And what we're measuring is something called PSA, or prostate-specific antigen, and levels above 4 are worthy of kind of further exploration. They might do an MRI, for example. The doctor might also do what's called a digital rectal exam, where they literally insert a gloved finger up your rectum, and they can actually feel the size of the prostate that way. But here's the thing, even if prostate cancer is identified, it develops very slowly. So slowly, in fact, that it might not affect the quality of life or shorten a man's lifespan at all. But a prostatectomy, which is surgery to remove the prostate, comes with all kinds of risks. Permanent urinary incontinence, for one, permanent irreversible ED or impotence for another. So really an important conversation between the patient and the doctor, because the risk to benefit ratio doesn't always stack up depending on the specific case. Okay. In terms of causes and risk factors of an enlarged prostate, aging, has to be said. But then again, aging is a risk factor for death, right? The older we get, the more likely we are to die. And so that's a factor. Obesity and insulin resistance play a role. At the beginning of this talk, I mentioned androgens. Again, I don't want to get too technical here, but one of those androgens is called DHT, dihydrotestosterone, and it's really a much more potent form of testosterone. It's about 10% of our testosterone is DHT. And as it happens, obesity increases the production of a different enzyme in the body called 5-alpha reductase. And that enzyme converts regular testosterone into DHT, which is generally not something we want too much of as we get older, because too much DHT can increase the size of our prostate gland over time. There are classes of drugs called 5-alpha reductase inhibitors that are often prescribed for enlarged prostate, but they come with a risk of side effects. And there are a number of natural ways to decrease this enzyme and keep DHT levels under control, which I'll talk about in a minute. You'll recall obesity also increases the enzyme aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogen. And it turns out too much estrogen in a man can also contribute to enlarging the prostate. We also know that men with enlarged prostates have a tendency towards zinc deficiency. So that's a risk factor. And because we use zinc to detoxify alcohol from the body, the more alcohol we drink, the more likely we are to be zinc deficient. Increased levels of stress hormone like adrenaline and noradrenaline over time can also increase the size of the prostate. We hear this term chronic inflammation so often these days. We're living in a world today that has a significant percentage of the population that is chronically inflamed, mostly because of diet and lifestyle choices. Aches and pains are an obvious sign of inflammation in the body, but there can also be silent inflammation, like the low-grade inflammation that causes heart disease, for example. And when an inflammation is prolonged, it activates certain cells in the immune system that damage tissues in the prostate gland, and that tissue repair process will enlarge the prostate gland over time as well. And incidentally, obesity, low zinc, alcohol, stress, all these things can increase inflammation in the body. Okay, that's enough gloom and doom. Let's shift gears now and talk about solutions and how we can support men's health and prevent, and in some cases reverse, the conditions and some of the symptoms that I've discussed so far. Obesity, you heard me mention, it's a factor in low testosterone, a factor in a healthy prostate. So maintaining a healthy weight is really foundational, I would say. We know there's no one size fits all. When it comes to weight loss, we all have different metabolisms and activity levels, and what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. But we do know that counting calories doesn't work, right? 5 out of 6 people who lose weight through calorie counting end up putting it all back on within 12 months. But what does tend to work is when we're able to establish a new way of eating that becomes a habit. And this is generally centered around eating for a balanced blood sugar. And we do this by kind of changing the shape of our plate and emphasizing protein and healthy fats in our meals that fill us up and keep us satisfied for longer, and de-emphasizing refined sugar and starchy carbs that otherwise spike our blood sugar and lead to blood sugar dips, and that leads to cravings, and ultimately that means we end up eating more food throughout the day and putting on more weight. Another strategy for weight loss that's quite popular these days is intermittent fasting, and this concept of time restricted eating, where we're looking at the clock, not the calories. And we can do this by, say, extending our overnight fast to say 12 or 14 or even 16 hours, and consuming all of our food in a shorter window of time, right? For example, 3 balanced meals a day, 5 hours apart, and no snacking in between. That is a 14-hour fast and a 10-hour eating window. And when we do this and we make sure our meals include plenty of protein and vegetables, not the starchy kind, we can pretty much eliminate hunger in between meals. And gradually we retrain our body to burn our own body fat for energy. Sleep was another big thing that featured in these different men's health conditions. I have to say, probably one of the most important pillars of health is good sleep. And we know that just one night of short sleep dramatically depletes our immune system, not to mention our energy levels and our mood. But our sexual health also suffers greatly with sleep deprivation because it affects our testosterone production. And yet we so commonly throw sleep under the bus in the name of kind of productivity or Netflix. Here's a shocking stat. Men that consistently get less than 6 hours sleep a night have smaller testicles and significantly lower testosterone levels than their counterparts who sleep happily 8+ hours a night. So if you want to improve your health in the bedroom, really important to prioritize sleep and practice something that we refer to as good sleep hygiene. For optimum health, we want to kind of aim for 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. That's kind of more in line with our evolutionary requirements. In 1945, believe it or not, we averaged 8.8 hours of sleep a night. And today, because of all the cool things we can do with electricity, we're averaging closer to 6.5 hours a night. And so some of the principles of good sleep hygiene include following a routine, right? And that is kind of making sure we go to bed and wake up at roughly the same time every day, including weekends, switching your devices off a couple hours before bed, not exposing ourselves to too much bright light late at night. This can disrupt our circadian rhythm and affect our melatonin production, and making sure our bedroom is dark and cool and ventilated. All these things can play a role in helping to improve our sleep. One of the biggest killers of men, full stop, is stress. Not just the occasional stress response, that can be a good thing, but I'm talking about the chronic ongoing stress that kind of chips away at our heart health and our mental health and our testosterone levels and our erectile function and our prostate health. Now, we all have different kind of things going on in our lives, and we also have different levels of tolerance to stress, and how someone manages this is an individual thing, right? For some, it might be practicing mindfulness or meditation. Another might be yoga or listening to music. And, it might sound like a no-brainer, but we sometimes forget to breathe, especially when we're stressed. We breathe shallowly. There are apparently as many ways to breathe as there are foods to eat. And this is something that everyone can access, and it's totally free of charge. Deep breathing is probably one of the most effective and most rapid ways to calm the mind and reduce stress levels. One quick little hack that I use is called the cycle of fours, where we breathe in slowly for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and hold for 4 seconds And repeating that 4 times takes just 1 minute and can dramatically just chill the stress levels. Exercise is another way to reduce stress. We know it increases endorphins and can lift mood. But with regards to men's health, we know that just 3 hours of walking per week can reduce the size of the prostate and improve the symptoms of nocturia, getting up to wee in the night. But when we do high intensity interval training or resistance training, weight bearing exercises like weightlifting or push-ups and pull-ups, this stimulates the body to produce more testosterone as part of an adaptive response to physical stress. So kind of working out intensely, engaging more muscles can release growth hormone and make us produce more testosterone. Another important consideration for men's health is reducing our exposure to toxins. I've mentioned how excessive alcohol lowers testosterone and can also be a factor in prostate growth. So if you're a drinker, we know that giving yourself 3 consecutive days off a week can go a long way in supporting the liver in its detoxification efforts. But, it's not all about alcohol. All toxins can have a negative effect. Since World War II, we have invented nearly 100,000 toxic chemicals that have been introduced into our environment and our food chain. And they're cumulative. And they're a significant reason why men today are so much less fertile than their grandfathers were. And many of these chemicals fall into a category known as endocrine disruptors. And this means that they have a hormonal effect in the body, and many of them actually mimic estrogen and can upset that hormone balance, And so we do want to make every attempt we can to reduce exposure to these toxins by avoiding the most common sources. One particularly common source is an endocrine disruptor called bisphenol A, or BPA. It's used to make plastics soft. And so the guiltiest party here are plastic coffee cup lids. We don't want to drink hot beverages through plastic coffee cup lids. That liberates BPA into the body. Till receipts are another source of BPA. If you don't need the receipt, don't touch it. Drinking filtered water can help reduce toxic exposure. And as far as our food, a recent government test in the UK found that 25% of all food and 33% of all fruits and vegetables contain 2 or more pesticide residues on them. And we call that the cocktail effect. So if you can afford it and it's an available option, going organic wherever available is also a really good way to reduce our toxic exposures. Now, it's not always possible to get optimum levels of nutrients from our diet. And we don't all consume perfectly balanced meals at every sitting, right? And so nutritional deficiencies are a common thing. And this is where nutritional supplements can really help. When it comes to men's health, zinc would be top of the list, right? Vital for testosterone and sperm production. And between 15 and 30 milligrams a day would be a good rule of thumb. Vitamin D, so many roles for vitamin D in the body: bone health, immune health. But turns out we also need vitamin D for testosterone production and for maintaining a healthy ratio between testosterone and estrogen in men. And supplementing vitamin D, turns out, also plays a role in the health of the prostate. Between 2,000 and 4,000 IU per day is generally a good rule of thumb, especially if you live in the UK, where it's particularly easy to become deficient, because for 6 months of the year between October and March, the sun just isn't high enough in the sky to make vitamin D. It's also so easy to test yourself these days. And if you're deficient, you might need much higher doses. And this is where a nutritional therapist can help guide you there. Another really important supplement for men's health and overall health, I have to say, is magnesium. It's nature's relax mineral, and it also helps to relax our blood vessels. So it's really important for healthy blood flow. And consider that during times of stress, our body uses up its magnesium reserves, so we can quickly get depleted. So supplementing 200 to 400 milligrams a day, good general rule of thumb. And the last nutrient I'll mention is omega-3 fatty acids, found mostly in oily fish, and they're very important for healthy blood flow and reducing inflammation in the body. And like magnesium, omega-3 is an essential nutrient that most people don't get enough of in their diet. And so a high quality omega-3 supplement can really be an important supplement to consider for overall health as well as men's health. And we can get these from a high quality fish oil supplement. And if you're a vegan, they now have omega-3 supplements that are derived from algae. I should mention the power of herbs as well. Herbal medicine has been used for thousands of years to safely support men's health. Herbs like saw palmetto. This is commonly used as a natural support for the prostate. Ginkgo biloba is a tree native to China, and the extract from the leaves is commonly used to support cognition and brain health because it boosts blood flow to the brain. But rest assured, anything that boosts blood flow to the brain boosts blood flow to other parts of the body as well, if you get my drift. Ginseng root, another Chinese herb used for thousands of years for fatigue and immune health, but also for brain health and erectile dysfunction. And lastly, ashwagandha. This has been used in India for thousands of years. It's commonly used for stress reduction, but it's also been shown to be helpful in improving sperm count and enhancing testosterone and libido. Now, needless to say, if you're under medical supervision for any sort of serious health condition and you're on medication, you'll want to speak to your healthcare provider first before you kind of self-provide some of these herbs. And just to bring this little talk to a close, I thought I would finish with one final recommendation that just might be the most important recommendation of them all, because let's face it, the biggest killer of men worldwide is in fact heart disease and diseases of the circulatory system, okay? Even if we have all the nutrients we need and we consume a healthy diet, in order for these nutrients to do their job, they have to circulate through the body, and no matter how good your diet is, if your nutrient, intake, or if your blood vessels, I should say, are diseased, then, your organs are going to be disadvantaged, including your sexual organs. And the Mediterranean diet is the most studied of all diets when it comes to human health. And I'm referring to this dietary pattern of the cultures that live around that Mediterranean basin. It's a diet that's largely plant-based. It contains an abundance of colorful vegetables and fruits, whole grains and legumes, and fresh herbs like parsley and mint and rosemary and thyme. It includes some dairy. Fish features prominently, a little bit of meat, not so much. But the secret sauce of the Mediterranean diet is olive oil, cold pressed, unfiltered, extra virgin olive oil. It's the primary fat used throughout the Mediterranean region. It's used for cooking. It's used for drizzling on vegetables and salads. It is super high in antioxidants and polyphenols that are anti-inflammatory. And since inflammation is the underlying factor in almost all disease, the more we can live an anti-inflammatory life, the better for overall health. And so in terms of an overall way to eat to support our health, especially men who are prone to higher rates of heart disease, I think following a Mediterranean diet, most of the time at least, appears to be a really good thing to do. And so with that, I want to thank you for sticking with me. I hope you found some of this information and some of these suggestions interesting and helpful. And I want to wish you absolutely the best of health. Thanks very much.
If you enjoyed this presentation, then click on the link in the description to subscribe to our Nutrition Talks email list. And don't forget to click the like button and subscribe.